Josip Broz Tito was a Yugoslav revolutionary and statesman, serving in various roles from 1943 until his death in 1980. During World War II he was the leader of the Partisans, often regarded as the most effective resistance movement in occupied Europe. While his presidency has been criticized as authoritarian, and concerns about the repression of political opponents have been raised, Tito was seen by most as a benevolent dictator due to his economic and diplomatic policies. He was a popular public figure both in Yugoslavia and abroad. Viewed as a unifying symbol, his internal policies maintained the peaceful coexistence of the nations of the Yugoslav Federation. He gained further international attention as the chief leader of the non-aligned movement, working with Jawaharlal Nehru of India, Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt and Sukarno of Indonesia. He was General Secretary of the League of Communists of Yugoslavia, and went on to lead the World War II Yugoslav guerrilla movement, the Partisans. After the war, he was the Prime Minister, President of the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. From 1943 to his death in 1980, he held the rank of Marshal of Yugoslavia, serving as the Supreme Commander of the Yugoslav military, the Yugoslav People's Army. With a highly favorable reputation abroad in both Cold War blocs, Josip Broz Tito received some 98 foreign decorations, including the Legion of Honor and the Order of the Bar. Josip Broz was born to a Croat father and Slovene mother in the village of Kumrovec, Croatia. Drafted into military service, he distinguished himself, becoming the youngest sergeant major in the Austro-Hungarian army of that time. After being seriously wounded and captured by the Imperial Russians during World War I, Josip was sent to a work camp in the Ural Mountains. He participated in the October Revolution, and later joined a Red Guard unit in Omsk. Upon his return home, Broz found himself in the newly established Kingdom of Yugoslavia, where he joined the Communist Party of Yugoslavia. Tito was the chief architect of the Second Yugoslavia, a socialist federation that lasted from 1943 to 1991–92. Despite being one of the founders of Cominform, soon he became the first Cominform member to defy Soviet hegemony and the only one to manage to leave Cominform and begin with its own socialist program. Tito was a backer of independent roads to socialism. In 1951 he implemented a self-management system that differentiated Yugoslavia from other socialist countries. A turn towards a model of market socialism brought economic expansion in the 1950s and 1960s and a decline during the 1970s. His internal policies included the suppression of nationalist sentiment and the promotion of the brotherhood and unity of the six Yugoslav nations. After Tito's death in 1980, tensions between the Yugoslav republics emerged, and in 1991 the country disintegrated into a series of wars, inter-ethnic conflict and unrest that lasted the rest of the decade, and which continue to impact many of the former Yugoslav republics. He remains a controversial figure in the Balkans. Early life. Pre-World War I, Josip Broz was born on the 7th of May 1892 in Kumrovec, a village in the northern Croatian region of Hrvatska Zagorje, which at that time was part of the Kingdom of Croatia-Slavonia within the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He was the seventh or eighth child of Franjo Broz and Maria Kuti Javasek, his parents having already lost a number of children in early infancy. He was christened and raised as a Roman Catholic. His father, Franjo, was a Croat whose family had lived in the village for 3 centuries, while his mother, Maria, was a Slovene from the village of Podsreda. The villages were only 16 kilometers apart, and his parents had been married on the 21st of January 1891. Franjo Broz had inherited a Ford-hectare estate and a good house, but he was unable to make a success of farming. Josip spent a significant proportion of his preschool years living with his maternal grandparents at Podsreda, where he became a favorite of his grandfather Martin Javasek, and by the time he returned to Kumrovec to commence school he spoke Slovene better than Croatian, and had learned to play the piano. Despite his mixed parentage, Broz was considered an ethnic Croat. In July 1900, at the age of 8, Broz entered primary school at Kumrovec, but only completed 4 years of school, failing the second grade, then graduating in 1905. As a result of his limited schooling, throughout his life he was poor at spelling. After leaving school, he initially worked for a maternal uncle, then on the family farm. In 1907, his father wanted him to emigrate to the United States, but could not raise the money for the voyage. Instead, aged 15 years, Josip left Kumrovec and traveled about 97 kilometers south to Sisak, where his cousin Jurika Broz was doing army service. Jurika helped him get a job in a restaurant, but Broz soon tired of that work and approached a Czech locksmith, Nikola Karas, for a 3-year apprenticeship, which included training, food, and room and board. As his father could not afford to pay for his work clothing, Josip paid for it himself. Soon after, his younger brother Stepan also became apprenticed to Karas. During his apprenticeship he was encouraged to mark May Day in 1909, and read and sold Slobodna Rek, a socialist newspaper. After completing his apprenticeship in September 1910, Broz used his contacts to gain employment in Zagreb, and at the age of 18 he joined the Metal Workers Union and participated in his first labor protest. He also joined the Social Democratic Party of Croatia and Slavonia. He returned home in December 1910, and in early 1911 began a series of moves, first seeking work in Ljubljana, then Trieste, Kumrovec and Zagreb, where he worked repairing bicycles and joined his first strike action on May Day 1911. After a brief period of work in Ljubljana, between May 1911 and May 1912 he worked in a factory in Kamnik in the Kamnik-Savania Alps, and when it closed, he was offered redeployment to Senkov in Bohemia. On arriving at his new workplace he discovered that the employer was trying to bring in cheaper labor to replace the local Czech workers, and he and others joined successful strike action to force the employer to back down. Driven by curiosity, Broz then moved to Plzeň, where he was briefly employed at the Skoda works, then traveled to Munich in Bavaria. He also worked at the Benz car factory in Mannheim, and visited the Ruhr. By October 1912 he had arrived in Vienna, where he stayed with his older brother Martin and his family and worked at the Griedel works before getting a job at Wiener Neustadt, where he worked for Daimler, and was often asked to drive and test the cars. During this time he spent considerable time fencing and dancing, and during his training and early work life he also learned German and passable Czech. World War I. In May 1913, Broz was conscripted into the Austro-Hungarian army for his compulsory 2 years of service. He successfully requested that he serve with the 25th Croatian Home Guard Regiment garrisoned in Zagreb. After learning to ski during the winter of 1913-14, he was sent to a school for non-commissioned officers in Budapest, after which he was promoted to sergeant major and became the youngest of that rank in his regiment. At least one source states that he was also the youngest sergeant major in the Austro-Hungarian army. After winning the regimental fencing competition, Broz went on to come second in the Army Fencing Championships in Budapest in May 1914. Soon after the outbreak of World War I in 1914, the 25th Croatian Home Guard Regiment marched towards the Serbian border, but Broz was arrested for sedition and imprisoned in the Petrovaradin fortress in present-day Novi Sad. Broz later gave conflicting accounts of this arrest, telling one biographer that he had threatened to desert to the Russians, but also claiming that the whole matter arose from a clerical error. A third version was that he had been overheard saying that he hoped the Austro-Hungarian Empire would be defeated. After his acquittal and release, his regiment served briefly on the Serbian front before being deployed to the Eastern Front in Galicia in early 1915 to fight against Russia. On one occasion, the scout platoon he commanded went behind the enemy lines and captured 80 Russian soldiers, bringing them back to their own lines alive. In 1980 it was discovered that he had been recommended for an award for gallantry and initiative in reconnaissance and capturing prisoners. On the 25th of March 1915, he was seriously wounded and captured during a Russian attack near Bukovina. Now a prisoner of war, Broz was transported east to a hospital established in an old monastery in the town of Svyazhsk on the Volga River near Kazan. During his 13 months in hospital he had bouts of pneumonia and typhus, and learned Russian with the help of 2 schoolgirls who brought him Russian classics by such authors as Tolstoy and Turgenev to read. After recuperating in mid-1916 he was transferred to the Arditov-Pau camp in the Samara Governorate, where he used his skills to maintain the nearby village grain mill. At the end of the year, he was again transferred, this time to the Kungur-Pau camp near Perm, where the POWs were used as labor to maintain the newly completed Trans-Siberian Railway. Broz was appointed to be in charge of all the POWs in the camp. During this time he became aware that the Red Cross parcels sent to the POWs were being stolen by camp staff. When he complained, he was beaten and put in prison. During the February Revolution, a crowd broke into the prison and returned Broz to the POW camp. A Bolshevik he had met while working on the railway told Broz that his son was working in an engineering works in Petrograd. So in June 1917 Broz walked out of the unguarded POW camp and hid aboard a goods train bound for that city, where he stayed with his friend's son. The journalist Richard West has suggested that because Broz chose to remain in an unguarded POW camp rather than volunteer to serve with the Yugoslav legions of the Serbian army, this indicates that he remained loyal to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and undermines his later claim that he and other Croat POWs were excited by the prospect of revolution and looked forward to the overthrow of the empire that ruled them. Less than a month after Broz arrived in Petrograd, the July Days demonstrations broke out, and Broz joined in, coming under fire from government troops. In the aftermath, he tried to flee to Finland in order to make his way to the United States, but was stopped at the border. He was arrested along with other suspected Bolsheviks during the subsequent crackdown by the Russian Provisional Government led by Alexander Kerensky. He was imprisoned in the Peter and Paul fortress for 3 weeks, during which he claimed to be an innocent citizen of Perm. When he finally admitted to being an escaped POW, he was to be returned by train to Kungur, but escaped at Ekaterinburg. Then caught another train which reached Tomsk in Siberia on the 8th of November after a 3,200-kilometer journey. At one point, police searched the train looking for an escaped POW, but were deceived by Broz's fluent Russian. In Omsk the train was stopped by local Bolsheviks who told Broz that Vladimir Lenin had seized control of Petrograd. They recruited him into an international Red Guard which guarded the Trans-Siberian Railway during the winter of 1917-18. In May 1918, the anti-Bolshevik Czechoslovak Legion wrested control of parts of Siberia from Bolshevik forces, and a provisional Siberian government established itself in Omsk, and Broz and his comrades went into hiding. At this time Broz met a beautiful 14-year-old local girl, Pelagia Polka Belousova, who hid him, then helped him escape to a Kyrgyz village 40 miles from Omsk. Broz again worked maintaining the local middle until November 1919, when the Red Army recaptured Omsk from white forces loyal to the provisional, all-Russian government of Alexander Kolchak. He moved back to Omsk and married Belousova in January 1920. At the time of the marriage, Broz was 27 years old and Belousova was 15. In the autumn of 1920, he and his pregnant wife returned to his homeland, first by train to Narva, by ship to Stettin, then by train to Vienna, where they arrived on the 20th of September. In early October, Broz returned home to Kumrovec in what was then the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats and Slovenes, to find that his mother had died and his father had moved to Jastobarsko near Zagreb. Sources differ over whether Broz joined the Communist Party while in Russia, but he stated that the first time he joined the party was in Zagreb after he returned to his homeland. Interwar communist activity. Upon his return home, Broz was unable to gain employment as a metalworker in Kumrovec, so he and his wife moved briefly to Zagreb, where he worked as a waiter, and took part in a waiters' strike. He also joined the Communist Party of Yugoslavia. He was asked to speak at a trade union meeting to mark the anniversary of the October Revolution, ending his speech with the words, "The workers can only conquer with the help of arms." In the same month he actively campaigned for the CPY in the elections for the Constituent Assembly, which was to adopt the constitution for the new state. The CPY's influence on the political life of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia was growing rapidly. In the 1920 elections it won 59 seats and became the third strongest party. After the assassination of Milorad Draskovic, the Yugoslav Minister of the Interior, by a young communist on the 2nd of August 1921, the CPY was declared illegal under the Yugoslav State Security Act of 1921. Due to his overt communist links, Broz was fired from his employment. He and his wife then moved to the village of Veliko Trojestvo, where he worked as a mill mechanic. After the arrest of the Communist Party leadership in January 1922, Stevo Sabic took over control of its operations. Sabic contacted Broz, who agreed to work illegally for the party, distributing leaflets and agitating among factory workers. In the contest of ideas between those that wanted to pursue moderate policies and those that advocated violent revolution, Broz sided with the latter. In 1924, Broz was elected to the party's district committee, but after he gave a speech at a comrade's Catholic funeral, he was arrested when the priests complained. Paraded through the streets in chains, he was held for 8 days and was eventually charged with creating a public disturbance. With the help of a Serbian Orthodox prosecutor who hated Catholics, Broz and his co-accused were acquitted. His brush with the law had marked him as a communist agitator, and his home was searched on an almost weekly basis. Since their arrival in Yugoslavia, Pelagia had lost 3 babies soon after the births, and 1 daughter, Zlatina, at the age of 2. Broz felt the loss of Zlatina deeply. In 1924, Pelagia gave birth to a boy, Zarko, who survived. In mid-1925, Broz's employer died and the new mill owner gave him an ultimatum: give up his communist activities or lose his job. So, at the age of 33, Broz became a professional revolutionary. The CPY concentrated its revolutionary efforts on factory workers in the more industrialized areas of Croatia and Slovenia. encouraging strikes and similar action. In 1925, the now unemployed Broz moved to Kraljevica on the Adriatic coast, where he started working at a shipyard to further the aims of the CPY. While at Kraljevica, he worked on Yugoslav torpedo boats and a pleasure yacht for the People's Radical Party politician Milan Stojadinovic. Broz built up the trade union organization in the shipyards and was elected as a union representative. A year later he led a shipyard strike, and soon after was fired. In October 1926 he obtained work in a railway works in Smederevska Palanka near Belgrade. In March 1927, he wrote an article complaining about the exploitation of workers in the factory, and after speaking up for a worker he was promptly sacked. Identified by the CPY as worthy of promotion, he was appointed secretary of the Zagreb branch of the Metal Workers Union, and soon after of the whole Croatian branch of the union. In July 1927, Broz was arrested, along with 6 other workers, and imprisoned at nearby Uglan. After being held without trial for some time, Broz went on a hunger strike until a date was set. The trial was held in secret and he was found guilty of being a member of the CPY. Sentenced to 4 months imprisonment, he was released from prison pending an appeal. On the orders of the CPY, Broz did not report to the court for the hearing of the appeal, instead going into hiding in Zagreb. Wearing dark spectacles and carrying forged papers, Broz posed as a middle-class technician in the engineering industry, working undercover to contact other CPY members and coordinate their infiltration of trade unions. In February 1928, Broz was one of 32 delegates to the conference of the Zagreb branch of the CPY. During the conference, Broz condemned factions within the party. These included those that advocated a greater Serbia agenda within Yugoslavia, like the long-term CPY leader, the Serb Sema Markovic. Broz proposed that the Executive Committee of the Communist International purge the branch of factionalism, and was supported by a delegate sent from Moscow. After it was proposed that the entire Central Committee of the Zagreb branch be dismissed, a new Central Committee was elected with Broz as its secretary. Markovic was subsequently expelled from the CPY at the 4th Congress of the Comintern, and the CPY adopted a policy of working for the breakup of Yugoslavia. Broz arranged to disrupt a meeting of the Social Democratic Party on May Day that year, and in a melee outside the venue, Broz was arrested by the police. They failed to identify him, charging him under his false name for a breach of the peace. He was imprisoned for 14 days and then released, returning to his previous activities. The police eventually tracked him down with the help of a police informer. He was ill-treated and held for 3 months before being tried in court in November 1928 for his illegal communist activities. He was convicted and sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. After his sentencing, his wife and son returned to Kumrovec, where they were looked after by sympathetic locals. But then one day they suddenly left without explanation and returned to the Soviet Union. After arriving at Lepoglava prison, Broz was employed in maintaining the electrical system and chose as his assistant a middle-class Belgrade Jew, Mosa Pijade, who had been given a 20-year sentence for his communist activities. The work allowed Broz and Pijade to move around the prison, contacting and organizing other communist prisoners. During the time together in Lepoglava, Pijade became Broz's ideological mentor. After 2.5 years at Lepoglava, Broz was accused of attempting to escape and was transferred to Maribor prison, where he was held in solitary confinement for several months. After completing the full term of his sentence, he was released, only to be arrested outside the prison gates and taken to Oberlin to serve the 4-month sentence he had avoided in 1927. He was finally released from prison in March 1934, but even then he was subject to orders that required him to live in Komrovec and report to the police daily. After his release, he lived incognito and assumed numerous noms de guerre, among them Walter and Tito. In 1934, the Zagreb Provincial Committee sent Tito to Vienna, where all the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Yugoslavia had sought refuge. He was appointed to the committee and started to appoint allies to him, among them Edward Kardelj, Milovan Filis, Alexander Rankovic and Boris Kidrich. In 1935, Tito traveled to the Soviet Union, working for a year in the Balkans section of the Comintern. He was a member of the Soviet Communist Party and the Soviet Secret Police. Tito was also involved in recruiting for the Dimitrov Battalion, a group of volunteers serving in the Spanish Civil War. In 1936, the Comintern sent Comrade Walter back to Yugoslavia to purge the Communist Party there, and in the same year, his father died. In 1937, Stalin had the Secretary-General of the CPY, Milan Gorkic, murdered in Moscow. Subsequently, Tito was appointed Secretary-General of the still outlawed CPY.